On March 5th, 1902, a boy was born in Waynesboro, Pennsylvania. That boy didn't know it then, but he would revolutionize the bow hunting industry and make archery a pastime that people wanted to bring back into the mainstream. There was something different about this boy. He had a lot of skill, and he mastered many different things in his lifetime. But out of all the things he mastered, the most important of all those was to create a movement that took archery from our own ancestral roots and brought it back into today's mainstream. From that day on, bow hunting became one of the norms in hunting and was one of the best ways for people to take game. Because of this man, we today have a legacy of bow hunters and bow hunting that have engulfed our country and many more. On today's show, the history of Fred Bear. This episode was created today by BHP Media, Inside Archery, and Bear Archery. We thank you for your support, and we also thank them for their contributions to this amazing episode of the one and only Fred Bear. Working on this project wasn't going to be easy, and I knew that, but I really wanted to bring something back to the people to hear of Fred Bear, because I worried that Fred Bear was getting lost in translation. Sure, a lot of people have heard of Fred Bear, but youth have not. And I thought it was really important to bring that back to the people to understand it. So what I did is I reached out to people in the industry, and I tried to gain as much knowledge as I could about Fred. And I also took a lot of that in and tried to put some of that into this episode for you guys to listen to and take in.
Hello, I'm Fred Bear. I spent most of my life in the outdoors, pretty much with a bow and arrow. You'd be surprised how much hand craftsmanship, and good old-fashioned know-how go into the making of bows and arrows. Our plant's just a short ways through the woods here. Come on along and we'll show you how we do it. I'm Fred Bear. Archery has always been my sport. It's fun and recreation for the entire family. Why don't you try it sometime? And be sure to be with me next week for my next story in my world of adventure.
Many consider Fred Bear the father of modern bow hunting. Even 30 years after his passing, Fred Bear is one of the most iconic and respected names in the industry. After all, his contributions to archery and bow hunting are countless, and the company bearing his name continues to produce top-tier equipment today. But what exactly warrants a title like the father of modern bow hunting? Well, it's simple. One could argue that the industry as we know it simply wouldn't exist without the achievements of Fred Bear. Here's a look at exactly why that is so. It's strange how easy it is to take archery and bow hunting for granted these days, especially for those of us in the industry. Shooting a bow simply feels natural, and although bow hunting numbers might not be as strong as we'd like, there are still millions of people in the U.S. who shoot archery, and that number continues to grow. Something special happened in North America to make archery what it is today. Granted, humans were hunting with bows and arrows long before the most ancient societies emerged, but archery was rendered obsolete for hunting and warfare by the invention of the gun near the end of the 1300s. If it weren't for a few stubborn cultures, archery would have become a thing of the past, a forgotten relic. England in particular continued to practice and revere archery, turning it into a cultural pastime. That affinity for archery was transferred to England's 13 North American colonies, where groups like the United Bowmen of Philadelphia formed and competed with target archery. Although archery was culturally ingrained, participation in the U.S. was mainly focused on target shooting and fairly sparse in terms of popularity. Guns were still the weapon of choice for hunting. Native American tribes even saw the obvious advantages of firearms and began favoring them over the bow and arrow for hunting and warfare. Archery was still considered inadequate for harvesting game, that is, until the early 1900s. In such a massive country, certain small, remote tribes remained isolated from Europeans much longer than others. Such was the case with the Yahi tribe in California, who remained undiscovered until the late 1800s. After a series of violent clashes with settlers, the remaining few members of the Yahi retreated into the remote wilderness where they remained until the last surviving member, known as Ishi, emerged from the woods in 1911. Having spent his entire life hiding deep in the Sierra Mountains, Ishii was completely uninfluenced by European culture and still practiced the bow hunting techniques that had been passed down to him by generations of his ancestors. His doctor, Saxton Pope, took great interest in Ishii and his traditional hunting techniques, and the two became great friends. Saxton Pope and his friend Arthur Young embraced the all-but-lost sport of bow hunting. They combined the recreational shooting imprinted by British culture with Native American techniques developed for the North American continent. They made headlines for exploits like hunting grizzly bears in Yellowstone with handmade bows, and they made films of their hunts to promote the sport. One of those films, titled Alaskan Adventure, caught the eye of Fred Bear. The rest, as they say, is history. An interesting chain of events led to Bear's introduction to bow hunting. What if England never preserved and passed on its love for archery? What if Ishii never emerged from the woods? What if Fred Bear never saw Alaskan Adventure? Lucky for us, those things happened. Also lucky for us, Fred Bear started his own chain of events that further proliferated archery and bow hunting. Bear was born on March 5, 1902, in Waynesboro, Pennsylvania. Growing up in a somewhat rural area, hunting was a natural activity, and Bear killed his first deer with a rifle at age 13. In addition to his introduction to hunting, Bear's family also imparted a fascination for craftsmanship and advertising. His grandfather was a skilled salesman for a manufacturing company, and his father was a talented machinist. Those influences were probably part of the reason Bear moved to Detroit at age 21 to work in the auto industry. Bear combined aspects of his father and grandfather's professions and became an expert pattern maker and leathersmith with a comfortable grasp on marketing. He also worked extensively with glue, another experience that would pay off down the road. In 1926, Bear became the plant manager for Jensen Manufacturing Company, an automotive manufacturer that made spare tire covers. A year later, he saw Alaskan Adventure, which sparked his interest in archery. He made his first bow that same year, and he also had a chance encounter with Arthur Young, further amplifying his newfound interest. Bear quietly improved his own bow design and practiced shooting as the plant manager of Jensen Manufacturing Company, but the beginning of the Great Depression turned his world upside down in 1929. The manufacturing company was hit hard, and on top of that, the building burned down in 1933, rendering Bear unemployed. Taking this stroke of bad luck as an opportunity to focus more on bow making, Bear pooled his money with his friend Charles Piper, who also lost his job to the fire. The two used the $1,200 they had between them to buy some second-hand sewing machines and other equipment and rent a small garage in Detroit. That enterprise was called the Bear Products Company, and although the main focus was making silkscreen banners for advertisements, Bear used the equipment to continue making archery gear. It might not have been official, but Bear archery was essentially born. Although Bear went on his first bow hunt in 1927, he didn't tag a whitetail with an arrow until 1935. The challenge only increased Bear's resolve, and it cast hunting with a gun in a different light. This is how Bear described one of his unspectacular hunts with a rifle. "I grew up a gun hunter," he said in a 1985 interview. "I shot a deer in 1933 up in the Upper Peninsula that dressed 285 pounds, the biggest deer I ever saw. And it was so easy. That opening morning I walked up to the draw, and there he was looking at me, and I was looking at him. I shot him, and he went down, and that's when the work began. So I thought bow hunting would be a little bit better." Bear's bow hunting success took time to develop, but he was undoubtedly an expert target shooter. Bear won first place at the Michigan State Target Archery Championship in 1934. Over the following years, he won dozens of other tournaments. During this time frame, Bear was still only making bows for himself and friends, but that's not to say he wasn't innovating and trying to grow the sport he loved. Bear organized Michigan's first bow hunting season in 1937, and that same year he patented his first archery glove. He was becoming a well-known and respected member of the archery community, and demand was growing for his incredible products. To meet that demand, Bear hired a master bowyer named Nels Grumley, and the two started producing and selling archery gear under the name Bear Products by Grumley. By 1939, developing and selling archery products was Bear's primary focus, and the Bear Product Company was split in two in 1940. Bear took over the archery side, and Piper continued overseeing the silkscreen advertising business. It's worth pointing out that keeping a business running during the Great Depression was no easy task. Bear's tenacity and knack for advertising were no doubt key in this achievement, and those qualities also helped Bear's archery-only enterprise develop and grow. Bear once quipped that he not only had to make a product, but create a market for it too. To build that market, Bear used his target shooting skills to captivate crowds across the Midwest. He would perform trick shots on stage and invite attendees to try out his bows afterwards. Bear helped popularize bow hunting by submitting pictures of a deer or bear he downed with a bow to newspapers, which often made the front page. Bear also followed in the footsteps of his heroes, Pope and Young, and produced his first hunting film in 1942. Bear went on to make many more films and TV appearances in order to grow the sport, and the effort was clear. Archery was becoming more commonplace as a sport and hunting tool. Meanwhile, his innovative spirit remained strong. Bear filed a patent in 1946 for a revolutionary new quiver that was attached to the bow instead of the archer's back or hip. By 1947, the increased demand for Bear bows warranted a larger building, so Bear relocated his facility to Grayling, Michigan. Resistant to mass-producing bows with machines instead of by hand, Grumley departed and the company was renamed to Bear Archery. Despite Grumley's reservations, this new approach allowed Bear bows to get more advanced and reach a larger number of people. Popular models like the Grizzly, Polar, and Kodiak were being produced at an incredible rate by 1949, and that's also the same year Bear began incorporating fiberglass cloth on his bow's limbs. This was a breakthrough, to say the least. Fiberglass was incredibly strong and flexible. It could endure a great deal of compression and stress without losing its original shape. Bear's time in the automotive industry was key in the discovery, implementation, and improvement of this new material. In 1949, fiberglass was only available in a crisscross pattern. That worked well for limbs, but it caused problems in other areas on the bow. To remedy this, Bear began developing unidirectional fiberglass, which he patented and put into production in 1951. More than half a century later, unidirectional fiberglass is still commonly used in bow construction. It's interesting how Bear was perhaps more enamored by the challenge of improving bow hunting gear than the challenge of bow hunting itself. Bear encountered many unexpected problems in his bow hunting career, and he was dead set on finding solutions. One great example of this occurred after Bear went on a hunting trip to Alaska. His luggage and the longbow it contained was lost during the journey. A left-handed shooter, Bear was unable to use his companion's gear, and the trip was a waste, or so it seemed. That experience, in addition to other hunts with broken bows and equipment failures, inspired Bear to develop a more compact and user-friendly bow, which eventually led to another innovation that's still widely used today: the takedown recurve. It took many years of trial and error until Bear perfected his design in 1970. Coincidentally, this is right around when bow hunting was hitting its stride in the United States. Fred Bear was a household name for a whole new generation of bow hunters, and for good reason. Bear's breakthrough developments and promotion of the sport made bow hunting more appealing and its equipment more effective. He helped pave the way for other innovators, and that, in turn, made the industry we have today. It's difficult to speculate what would have happened if Fred Bear didn't accomplish all that he did in the name of archery. His passion for the sport, along with his profound desire to improve archery gear, helped build the industry's foundation, and his approach still serves as a blueprint for today's industry leaders. On top of all that, one of Bear's most admirable and resonating qualities was his spiritual affinity for archery and the outdoors. There are many Fred Bear quotes that can inspire hunters and non-hunters alike, so it seems fitting to end on one that sums up his outlook perfectly. "I hunt deer because I love the entire process, the preparations, the excitement, and the sustained suspense of trying to match my wood lore against the finely honed instincts of these creatures. On most days I spent in the woods, I came home with an honestly earned feeling that something good has taken place. It makes no difference whether or not I got anything, it has to do with how the day was spent.
So as we dig deeper into Fred Bear's life and how Fred Bear created the Bear Archery Company, we decided to ask some questions to Bear Archery themselves.
My name is Jack Borcherding, and I'm the marketing manager here at Bear Archery. Bear Archery has an amazing story that just really needs to be told and understood. The hands of Fred Bear crafted and built these amazing bows early on in his career, and now no one else in our hunting industry can really say that they are the father of modern bow hunting. Only Fred Bear can do that, and only Bear Archery has that history to tell.
What things has Bear Archery done to keep the legacy of Fred Bear alive?
Well, I would say Fred Bear is just very much alive in everything that we do. We still hold all of his values when we think about building new products, when we think about bringing a new bow to market, when we think about a new product and everything that we do, we think about would Fred Bear have done this? Would he have priced it like this? Would he have built it because of this? Would he have innovated? And I think we're doing all of those things. In addition to, man, if you come into our facilities, Fred Bear is the father of all that we started, or all that he started, and all that we care about every single day, and we won't let that ever die. Fred Bear really is much alive in the sense of how we utilize him and use his guidance to build all of our products and our brands and everything that we do. Fred Bear's on the name of a bunch of our shirts. There's a gift tin that's possibly going to come out that, it's amazing what he can still do when he's really even not here in the physical. So he is much in everything that we do here at Bear Archery.
How do you think Fred Bear would feel about today's archery industry?
Well, honestly, I think that Fred Bear would think first, everything is way overpriced. Why are we making the customer pay so much for a sport that we love to do and just want to share with others? And I think here at Bear Archery, we are still thriving with what Fred Bear started in building an affordable, economical bow for customers to use that has great performance. But I really think he might be okay with the industry where it's at, but he is an innovator. He was a guy who just wanted to do the next best thing and try new things. And so I think he would go out there and he would try new things. He'd try to be an innovator, and he would try to always answer to the customer's needs. And that's what we try to do at Bear, and what he instilled, in the company at an early time frame, and that's what we're still trying to do here today.
How do you think Bear Archery has changed the way people think of archery?
Well, honestly, people wouldn't think about archery without Bear. Fred Bear started it all. He's the father of modern bow hunting, and people really wouldn't be able to think about Bear Archery. Now, who's to say that somebody wouldn't have come along and done that or taken up that place? We can't say, but we're the only company that has a Fred Bear icon to live up to. And, he is just awesome when it comes to what he did for the sport, what he tried to get people into, all of those things. It's amazing what he did. And, maybe I would say people right now are really thinking about Bear Archery. We have superior products in the Legend Series line of bows and in our, just normal line of bows that we have that anybody can get. They're awesome products. Speed, performance, shootability, lightweight, all of those things can be answered by the name of Bear.
What makes Bear Archery a special place, considering the fact that it was founded by Fred Bear?
Well, here at Bear Archery, we foster so much just about what we like in products. Almost everyone here is a bow hunter, and they understand what bow hunters want. And we build products for bow hunters, and because we are bow hunters, we are outdoorsmen, we do care about the land and preserving everything that Fred Bear started in our industry. And we just want the sport to live on, because if we don't pass it down to our kids, if we don't get it going, then we're not sure what will happen. But our goal is to provide superior products for customers at an extremely efficient value to them, and just what we need to do as a company to provide those things to our customers.
The interview with Bear Archery was really important because it really echoed and mimicked the lifestyle of Fred Bear, something that was extremely important to do to know that legacy is living on and is living on in the Bear Archery Company. This brings us to our next important person that knew Fred Bear, and that is Ted Nugent, the rock star and musician, activist, whatever you want to call him. Ted Nugent is out there, and we actually had a chance to interview Ted Nugent a few months back on our podcast. And you can hear in Ted's voice when we ask the question about Fred Bear, it kind of changes. It goes from really excited to almost a little bit more sad and refined. And I think that is extremely real. And I don't think that's mimicked or faked by any means. And these comments from Ted are extremely important, because obviously he created one of the songs that will always live on and helped to keep the name of Fred Bear strong. And that song is called Fred Bear, and it is absolutely amazing. It is something that people worship and listen to every time before their opening days and while at hunting camp. So it's become kind of the anthem of bow hunting. Here's Ted.
So Ted, hey, what's it like to have met and known Fred Bear? That's an amazing thing.
Wow, I could keep you burning redwood forest, a campfire wood, just celebrating that incredible blessing and humbling experience. I was born in 1948. My dad was already a follower of Fred's. My dad had a long bow, and this was pre-recurve, it was right after Howard Hill and Pope and Young, and Fred Bear witnessed their newsreel bow hunting the hard way, and it was just an explosive time of returning to this, what you and I are so turned on by, the mystical flight of the arrow and getting close to game, that Fred really perfected the promotional believability of abandoning the Weatherby long-range technology, which is a wonderful discipline unto itself. Yeah. Sniper marksmanship is a wonderful thing, and I will always celebrate long-range crosshairs. But my dad, like so many, were beginning to be turned on by this return to this spirit of the wild, if I dare. And so we would go north every October for the opener, October 1st in Michigan. By the time I was on my dad's back in December, October of 1949. I was only 10 months old. Wow. So I consider that my first deer season, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I've never missed a season. We'd stop at this little shack. It was a little shack, like a stone garage, a cinder block garage in Grayling, with this hand-carved Bear Archery sign over the door. And I didn't know what was going on. I probably first entered Bear's little shop there when I was 5 or 6 years old. And I didn't know who he was, but I was already addicted to bows and arrows. I had a little bow and arrow, and I'd shoot river rats and chipmunks and anything that crossed my path. I had a grand slam of songbirds by the time I was 7. And so when I finally got to be 8 or 9 years old on our annual trips, and we'd stop at Grayling, and Fred was often there, and he was, inventing the laminating process. He had that crude lathe there where he was laminating the wood and the oozing glass between the wood slats. And I was now starting to realize, this is Fred Bear. This is the Chuck Berry of bow hunting. And we would have cherry pie and chocolate milk at the Grayling restaurant, and every year I couldn't wait to get up there, because now he's on the cover of True magazine, and he's on TV shooting polar bears and grizzly bears, and I'm still after the chipmunk slam, so I'm fascinated by this guy. And he was such a kind man, such a gentleman, a real easygoing guy. And I just looked up to him, and he was real friendly. And my dad eventually represented a Swedish steel company and then sold the blue-tempered rolled spring steel to Fred for the manufacture of his bleeder blades for the Bear Razorhead. So now it was not just a friendly bow hunting visit, but now it was a business visit, and my dad would go hunting up there in Harrison and in Grayling and Gaylord every year with the Bear team. And now it's a big shack. It's still just a small business. But by the time I graduated from high school, I moved to Chicago with my family. My dad was transferred, and so in '67 I came back. I was there for 2 years. And as soon as I came back, I had the Amboy Dukes, and I was starting to have long hair. And of course, Fred was scared to death of rock and roll, especially because I looked like a hippie, and he was afraid I might have turned into a hippie. But of course, I was not. When Fred, was concerned about this scary rock and roll, and then people would tell him, and Fred told me this. He said, "No," they came to me and said, "No, Fred, everything Ted does, every time he does an interview, which I do thousands a year, he always promotes archery and the discipline, and he always talks about conservation, and he's always on the side of law and order instead of the hippies that call cops pigs." And so Fred thought, and we had a lot of talks about how I was completely opposite of the rest of the world of rock and roll. It was because of the bow and arrow discipline. It really was. Yeah. And we got to be close friends, and we'd go to, sporting events, Anderson Clinic together and different sporting events. And I was just in awe that I get to hang out. And then he invited me to Grouse Haven. We'd hunt every year. I mean, and you wonder why I'm like this? I mean, why I'm like this. I've literally been to the mountaintop of life. If your life is bow hunting, like it is for us, there's just nowhere else to go. Mm-hmm. That was it. I hunted with Fred Bear. He's my buddy. Yeah. We called, and he'd call me, and we'd write letters, and come on, that's the dream. So I take that to heart, which is why when he died in April of '88, I had hunted with him in his last hunt at Grouse Haven in October of '87, and he literally put his hand on my shoulder walking those beautiful trails at Grouse Haven, and he said, "I've heard the attacks on you. I hear these idiots in our industry that hate you because of the rock and roll. They don't know you." He looked me in the eyes and he said, "You keep promoting bow hunting with that energy that you have." Yeah. He told me that every bow hunting event he went to, all the young people ever wanted to know was if he knew Ted Nugent. I mean, think of that insanity. So he said, "Boy, you're really turning a lot of young people, rock and roll fans, you're turning them on to the hunting lifestyle." So that's why my critics and the haters, they roll off of me like personal hygiene off of Michael Moore's back. Every time somebody says something stupid about me, I just get bigger and badder and louder and prouder because Fred Bear told me that he liked the way I did it.
This interview with Ted Nugent was definitely by far one of my favorite pieces of this project because you can really hear how much passion and love Ted has for Fred Bear. Creating a song that not only revolutionized an industry and a man, Ted Nugent created something that was going to help more and more people get outdoors.
And I knew his name, and it was good to see him again. 'Cause in the wind he's still alive. Oh, Fred Bear, walk with me down the trails again. Take me back where I belong. Oh, Fred Bear, I'm glad to have you at my side, my friend. And I'll join you in the big hunt before too long.
There's no doubt that Fred Bear embodied something different, something that we just didn't truly understand. There's timeless pieces of footage of Fred Bear There's a complete DVD kit and set, which we're going to listen to a little bit of that audio from Bear Archery. But there's tons of books about this man. There's tons of great friends he's had throughout the years that have written books about him and that have really give you a glimpse into what he really did accomplish for us. He really did give back. And I want to say that I proposed the question to the community, and I asked the question, what is Fred Bear to you? It was interesting to see some of the responses from this question, but you know, I wasn't too surprised to see him. So Rick Wood said, the godfather of archery. Steve Decker said, he had the biggest influence on me as a young teenager. I learned to hunt with a Bear Magnum recurve bow. It came with a book about him. I read it and became hooked on bow hunting. What an adventure my life became. Thanks, Mr. Fred Bear. Eric Armbruster said, my youngest, 4 years ago, picked up Fred Bear for his Michigan Living Museum project in 3rd grade. Fred revolutionized bow hunting and made it more obtainable for people to get involved. Jason Woolridge said, he is a positive influence on the bow hunting lifestyle from the earliest years of the sport. Manuel Bennett said, not only the maker of my first bow, which I still have, he inspired me to challenge myself more as an archer, which rolled over into my daily life. Zach Spaniel said he embodied the mentality that all hunters should have. Mike Cedar said, my dad worked for him at the factory in Grayling. I had the recurve now that Fred Bear gave him. Jeffrey Davis said, great hunter. Dwayne Keller said, idol, icon, and legendary. Dino Williams said, innovator in bow hunting. Some of the themes that you'll hear over and over in these comments on our Facebook page are legend, the master, icon, legendary, inspirational, great hunter, and much more. Fred Bear was just that to so many different people. These comments kept flooding in, and as much as I'd love to read them all, you can do it on our Facebook page. But to end this magical podcast that we really wanted to share with you guys, we're going to leave you with the voice of Fred Bear himself, talking to you about the history of the bow and arrow. This is a great piece, and you can watch the full video on the Fred Bear collection from Bear Archery. So check it out. It's a 4-disc series, but I learned a lot about Fred Bear and in this video series, and also a couple different books that are out there for Fred that are all about his life, which we'll link below. As usual, thank you for your support in the Boner Planet podcast, and thank you for listening. Enjoy this clip.
It's not generally known just when bows or archery was invented. They're made out of wood, the bows and the arrows, and they're not durable like other artifacts that can be dug up and aged. But the best guess that we've been able to come up with is some 50,000 years ago. How they were invented or who invented them, we don't know. But we think maybe the little bow, the little bent stick with the string on it that was used to spin the little drill to make fire might have given the idea to somebody. It may even be that the little drill thing got misused and that the bow shot the arrow or the little drill out of it, and the idea came that way. It seems logical that might have been the way it was done. Chinese made a bow. I'm not suggesting that the Chinese invented it, but they made a bow with a handle, and they still make them that way. They only make ceremonial bows nowadays, but the handle was about a third of the way up from the center, from the bottom of the bow, from the lower end of the bow. And our best guess on that is that the first bow was maybe a sprout from a tree or a stump, and they put a string on it, and because it was thicker and heavier at the bottom, they had to hold it lower, and that may have suggested that all bows had to be built that way, because they still do it, but only, I think, for ceremonial effects they use. At least the modern archers use the kind of equipment we use now. The first bows, and the bows the English used, made history with them, were made out of yew, and they looked very much like this. They were narrow, they were flat in the back. The yew wood that they used, and this is a yew wood bow, It's a very springy material, and I think it came mostly from Spain. They didn't have any or very little yew in England, but this wood was available to them. And the milk bows were made, and they were crowned on the compression side, on the inside. And I don't know why it took so long, but it's only just 50 years ago that we discovered if that section were flat and the limb were wider, the bows would be much more durable. They wouldn't break so often because the stresses would be spread evenly. And actually, there were no change in the bow design over all those years until about 500 years ago. The Turks came up with the idea of a composite bow. And this, you may not seem like a bow, but it is. It's built over a form backwards. The center, there's a core section in there, same as the core section in all the bows that are made today. The back is sinew from animals, heel or loin tendons from animals. It's dried and glued on there on this wood centerpiece. And the compression, the sinew is on this side because the bow pulls around this way. It spreads around and pulls just the opposite direction. The sinew is on this side here, the back side, and then the core. And on the compression side is the horn of the Asiatic buffalo. And this bow shoots an arrow much, much faster. And matter of fact, even with our modern technology, we have only just recently, just in the last few years, exceeded the flight distances that the Turks shot an arrow. They shot arrows over 900 yards. And it's taken us a long time to catch up with them, but we've exceeded that distance now. But that was quite an advantage in a battle. If you could shoot an arrow farther, and the battles, many of them were fought with clouds of arrows, if you could shoot and reach your enemy before before you're in range with his equipment, is quite an advantage. And the Turks did a great job with this bow, except they had to pick the days they're going to fight because they didn't have any waterproof glue, and if it got too wet down, they were out of business, and the war was over. Well, from this stage, the modern bow, the straight bow, like the English made out of yew, is now made usually a laminated wood and fiberglass. It was a war-borne material, and how we happened to use fiberglass in the bows. A salesman for Corning Glass Company in Corning, New York, he was an archer, a bow hunter, dropped into our shop in Detroit in the very early 40s. And he had a piece of fiberglass cloth. And I had never seen or heard of it. And I was very surprised that glass would be flexible like it was to be woven into a cloth like this. But I had not any great interest in it until he mentioned that it was elastic. He said that it was elastic and it was very strong, and it would stretch or compress, and unlike any other material, would always return to its original position until it was overstressed and it would break. Well, that interested me because if it was elastic, maybe it's a material we needed for the back of our bows. And so I asked him if he'd send me some of the cloth when he got back, and he said he would, which he did. And we were at that time doing some work for Chrysler, and we knew their head chemist there, whose name was Don Swayze, who had developed a cement or glue for bonding or gluing rubber to metal. First time it ever was heard of, and it was used to make rubber motor mounts so that the vibrations of the engine would not be transmitted to the frame. And of course, all motor mounts are made like that now. Well, I took this glass, and he'd invented this, they called it a cycle weld cement. 5509 was the name of it. I took this fiberglass cloth over to Don Swayze and said, can you coat this with your cycle weld cement and lay 3 or 4 layers together and cure it in the press. Cured at 325 degrees. He said, yeah, sure. So he made us some, the first fiberglass bow material. We put it on some bows, and we found out that it worked fine on the extension side. It was a glass cloth, of course. It worked fine, did a beautiful job, made the bow unbreakable, but it was too strong for the, on the compression side, the belly side, it wouldn't take it because it was a cloth, and the little fibers being bent like that would kink and break. So, but it was a good backing material, and but it was too strong, and it chrysaled the wood. It checked the wood. The wood wouldn't take the compression. So then, for it was a great backing material, and for about a year, we put aluminum on the face of it. And here's a bow with that aluminum on it. The aluminum was stronger. We cemented to it with the cycle weld cement, and it did a pretty good job. It stayed straight and took the did the job it was supposed to do. But in the meantime, we got fiberglass thread or yarn and wrapped it on a wheel and cured it while it was turning to get a unidirectional glass where we didn't have to use the cloth. All the fibers were running in the same direction. And we got that on the bow, and we found that did the job. So here's a bow with the glass on the both sides, and that's the way practically all of the bows have been made in the last 30 years. And it did a great job because to the industry, if you wanted a good bow up until this time, till fiberglass was available, you had to seek out a fellow who probably had a workbench in his basement and had a natural ability as a craftsman and an eye for beauty. You had to get a hold of him if you wanted a real good bow, and say, hey, how about making me a bow? Well, he said, yeah, I'll make you a bow. And maybe sometimes he would say, well, you want to pick out the billets? We're talking about the U-bow, of course. We also did the same thing with Osage Orange. Maybe he had some billets there, and you could pick the billets out like you'd pick out the grain for a gun stock. And he'd make your bow in maybe 2 or 3 weeks or months. You would get it. And it was rather expensive. And its life was questionable because you never knew when they're going to break. Well, and to get the U material, there were people out in the West. U came mostly from Oregon, up in the high mountains. The best of U came at the higher altitudes, and there were people who would, with a pack sack and a lunch kit, maybe even a tent, walk around those mountains looking for a U tree that had a long enough section in it to make a half a bow. Bows, all the good bows were made in billets that were only half the length. They're fishtail spliced in the middle. It was very difficult to get a piece 6 feet long without flaws in it. One of the problems was the U-wood has a berry on it, and bears like the berries, and when they climb a yew tree to get the berries, they usually tear the sapwood up with their claws sliding down. So that was one of the problems, and the source of the wood was very questionable. So finally, when fiberglass came along, you could work it with a micrometer. You didn't have to follow the grain. And you took a couple pieces of maple and glued it on the outside, and you had a bow that you could put into production. And for the first time in the history, we had a bow that we could sell to the dealer at a discount, so he could make a little money, and he had it available to the consumer. And it's really one of the things that caused the rapid growth in archery and bow hunting that we've been going through in the last 30 years. The availability of good equipment at a reasonable price from sporting good dealers. The glass bow is very, very durable, much more durable than anything we had in the past. And as I said, that's one of the reasons for the popularity of bow hunting today. Not too long ago, it was discovered, well, actually the Turks discovered it, that if you curved the end of the bow limbs, the bow would be smoother to draw. It wouldn't tighten up so fast in the back end, and it would shoot an arrow faster. So we began to make bows, and this is only in the early 30s that we began to make bows with a what we call a recurve, and this is a non-working recurve. It's stiff, and the way that it pulls and creates gives it better speed is because as you pull it back, the bow becomes longer. As the string leaves this recurve section here, the bow becomes longer, and that makes the weight pulling less at the back end of the draw. And then, not too long ago, we began making the bow, like many of them are made today, with a working recurve. This has the maple core and the fiberglass on both sides, and this does a better job of smoothing up the back end of the draw and gives you more speed to the arrow. That pretty much covers the bows of today, the conventional bows of today. And the next step, the biggest thing that's happened in archery in a great many years is a compound bow. And that's the bows with the wheels on the ends and the cables. The handle is usually magnesium, could be wood. The limbs are usually laminated like the conventional longbow, but could also be solid fiberglass. We have cams or eccentrics on the end here, and what they do is on every other type of bow, it gets heavier as you pull it back. This bow, it gets easier as you pull it back by as much as 50%. So you can have a 50-pound bow that pulls 50 pounds up here, and when you get back to full draw, to the length of the arrow, it drops off to 25 pounds, and it's quite an advantage because it's very easy to hold 25 pounds as against holding 50 pounds while you're aiming. And so this bow is, the compound bow is taking over, and about 9 out of 10 of the bows that are sold and used today are made like this. It's interesting to note that the fiberglass technology, the actual ability of preparing the fiberglass yarn to its job that it needs to do in the bow was developed by those of us here at Bear Archery quite a few years ago in the days of the conventional bow. The stresses in the compound bow, the bow with the wheels and the cams, are very high. And without this technology, without this already prepared and tested material, we would not have the compound bow. We would not have any materials to stand up under the stresses that are developed. And those of us at Bear Archery are real happy that we've had a rather large part in this promotion. In the heavy bows that are used for hunting, which are usually 50 pounds or more, the fact that the weight drops off and to maybe 50% or 30 or 40% and is easier to hold reminds me of a bow, a yew bow that we made in the very early days of our archery business. I had a stave, a beautiful yew stave, full-length 6-foot stave that Art Young had given me. And I had a bowyer by the name of Nels Crumley, and we would occasionally take that stave and look at it and kind of sort of study it like you might look at a diamond that you're going to cut. The stave was valuable because it was so beautiful, and it had extra value because it was young. So after a couple of years, finally got a bow made, and the bow turned out to be 85 pounds. Well, 85 pounds is a lot of bow, and when a yew wood is finished, yew wood bow is finished, and you put a string on it and weigh it, whatever that weight is, if the bow is properly tillered and nicely made, that's the weight it should stay at. But 85 pounds was entirely too heavy. And I first gave it to a friend of mine who lived up in West Branch. He was a real husky woodsman, outdoorsman. And he shot it for a while. And then it wound up in the hands of a fellow over on the east side of Michigan. I've forgotten his name. And he went hunting with it, went deer hunting with it one day. And he saw a beautiful buck coming at an angle. Going to pass him real close, and he was going to get a good shot. So he waited till the deer's head was behind a big tree, and then he pulled his bow back. Well, the deer stopped. And he said, I didn't know. He said it was so heavy I couldn't hold it. But he said, I knew if I let it down, I couldn't get it back again. So I never did get the rest of the story, but he didn't get the deer, and that was one of the problems that we had with heavy bows that is eliminated by the use of the compound bow. You're holding a much lighter weight, and if a deer stops his head behind a tree, you can always wait. Again, referring to our early days in Detroit, where our business began in 1933, the Belgians, quite a number of people from Belgium in Detroit that time, there still are, yes. They, in the old country, used to have popinjay shoots. It was a big pole, went way up in the air, and had arms on it, and arms had little pointed spikes on it, and they'd make a little bird out of a wooden clothespin. They'd drill a hole through it and put it on there, and we'd put some bird feathers on it, make it look like a bird. And you stood under the pole and shot straight up with an arrow that had a head on it about an inch in diameter. The head was made out of Asiatic buffalo horn. And that really was not so much an archery shooting match, more of a drinking match, because you got one shot. You drew a number when you registered. You drew a number, and there might be 50 shooters. Maybe there's 100 shooters. A big tournament. And when your number came up, you got out there and you shot an arrow. And then you didn't get turned again till everybody else had shot an arrow. In the meantime, there was usually a keg there, and it was quite an affair. Well, in Detroit, we couldn't. They had horizontal archery ranges. Popinjay was the name of it. That's what they call the birds, a popinjay. It was a jaybird. And they shot horizontally in Detroit, indoors. And there was a range there. I think the name of it was the Green Tavern. And they had this range downstairs. And the upstairs was a bar. And you also threw darts up there. And it was quite a deal. Well, their bows, made in Belgium, were laminated bows made of 3 different kind of woods, and they were very long, 6 and some of them 7 feet. And because they were so long and so hard to get around with in a car or a streetcar, they had them take apart. It was a ferrule type thing, like you take a fish rod apart. Well, on a trip I made to Alaska with the conventional longbow that I had to check as baggage along with my other gear, I took a flight nonstop from Chicago to Anchorage, and I got off the plane, but my archery equipment didn't. And the stop in Anchorage was for fuel, and my hunt was a fly-in hunt, and I'm being left-handed. There were no other left-handers in the party, and I found those moose pretty hard to kill with rocks, so I determined that I would make a bow that could be taken apart and put in a small enough case to go under my seat in the airplane. The first attempt was this one here. This is even before the fiberglass thing, because that has a piece of vulcanized fiber on for the backing. And this is a laminated bow like the Belgians use also with hickory. The light wood is hickory in this bow, and this face wood is Osage orange, which is stronger than yew and a harder wood. It also has the solid, non-working recurve. Well, the bow I made, this first design, comes apart like that. It's an iron hook that hooks into a piece of steel that's screwed and glued to the bow. And that was all right. That worked good, except the only advantage was it was a take-apart. And if half the bow broke, well, what do? You have to make the whole thing over again and match it up with the other half. And that didn't work out so good. So I finally decided that the handle of the bow, the middle section of the bow, being the major part of the bow and where most of the work was, that if I made a handle and limbs that would slide into it and be fastened into it, it'd be a pretty good deal, and it would be in a real small container, no problem getting it under the seat, and real handy. And then you could also change limbs. You could have limbs for practice, or limbs for your wife or son or whatnot, and limbs of different length. You take them right out and put them in. And this was the first model of that bow. These limbs came out, were held in with this little thing like a shotgun, just like taking a double-barrel shotgun apart. You push a lever and two pieces come apart in your hands. No screws, bolts, nothing. And I took this bow to Africa in 1964, and I shot a Asiatic buffalo with it. But this system, this socket system, was not right. It was too expensive to make. That was the main thing that was wrong with it. So we went back to the workbench, and a couple of years later, we came up with the final design where you pull this little clip back, and the limb comes right out. The limb itself straddles a tongue or a groove in the handle there, and it always goes back straight. Very easy to put together and no big problem, and you can break it down into a case that's less than 2 feet long. This is the bow that is the ultimate. There are lots of limbs that you bolt in, like in the compound bow, and there's all kinds of takedown, but this is the takedown that everybody likes best, and we still produce it. This is my personal hunting bow. I've been hunting with this bow since 1965, when we changed from this kind of a experimental socket to this kind, which is what we still have today. I still shoot this bow, this conventional bow. A lot of people wonder why I don't shoot the compound bow. Well, I taught myself to shoot. And when you teach yourself sports, sometimes without any instructions exactly how to do it, you sometimes develop bad faults. And I had a lot of them. And I finally turned out to be a snap shooter. And there are two kinds of snap shooters. I want to warn you about this. One of them is when you're afflicted with a problem, a mental problem called freezing. And it seems silly to say that you have trouble. When you suffer from this problem, it seems silly to say that you cannot pull the bow all the way back and hold it while you're aiming. And you develop into being a snap shooter. But most snap shooters never get the bow back to the full draw. Most snap shooters who are suffering from this a little thing I'm talking about, it's called freezing, never get the bow back far enough. So for that reason, their aiming is haphazard, and it doesn't impart all the velocity to the arrow that the bow would if it was pulled back all the way. I went through that. There was a couple of years when I went hunting. I wished I wouldn't see a deer to shoot at, because I knew that I wouldn't shoot well. Matter of fact, I made a film, our first deer hunting film, under that condition. I lost a couple of good chances at some deer. I was hoping I wouldn't see a deer. Terrible, isn't it? Well, because of this, I found that if I could concentrate right from the top of my head to the end of my toes on the very, very center of the target, not the bullseye, but the center of the bullseye. And if I talked to myself at each shot and pulled the bow all the way back until I came to full draw, that I had the thing pretty well licked. And I used a heavy bow because a heavy bow helped me. This bow I've been shooting is 65 pounds. I've shot that all the time. I found that if the bow is heavier, you get a better loose, and everything works out better. So I'm a snap shooter, and I'm aiming when I'm drawing. It's like you ask a pitcher, how does he throw the ball right across the outside corner of the plate? He doesn't have any mechanical way to do it. The body, the human body, is a great piece of equipment, and you can, by practice and training, teach it to do almost anything. And when you have practice shooting instinctively, and I mean instinctively, I don't mean with string walking or a gap system. I mean just by concentrating from the end of your toes to the top of your head on the very tiny spot that you want to hit. It's amazing what the body can do, and that's the way the pitcher does. He does it by practice. How does the outfielder heave the ball in and hits the ground and into the catcher's mitt and the first hop when the fellow's stealing home? How does the carpenter hit the nail on the head? It's all in the human body to be able to do that from practice. So my style of shooting has always been, since in the last 40 years, instinctive shooting and by the snap shooting method. And it's worked out for me. I don't recommend it to anybody because it takes a lot of practice and a lot of concentration. And you have to have, I think, a certain knack, a certain feel to be good at it. The same as there are good pitchers and there are bad pitchers. And there's fellows that can throw the ball to the home plate on the first bounce and the fellows that can't. So, as I say, I don't recommend it to anyone but if you want to go that route, it's just great. And you don't have to even think when you're faced with an animal that you want to shoot at. You don't have to think about it. You just go through it, and after you've made a fine shot, you can't tell anybody how you did it. It just happens. And so along comes a compound bow, and I went bear hunting up in Ontario with one of our very first compound bows. And I tell you, I couldn't hit anything. I found that when I tried to shoot a compound bow, snap shooting, when I came over that hump, I'd lost everything. I'd lost the feel. I had no idea where the arrow was going to go. And I tried it for 2 days. And I finally finished the hunt by putting a sight on the bow. And I could do a little better, but I cannot shoot a compound bow. Concentration is the main thing. In shooting instinctively, you will never shoot a good tournament score because the human system cannot stand a whole day of the kind of concentration that is needed to be a good instinctive shooter. The system can't stand it. You'll blow up. You'll have a nervous breakdown if you try to do it. And I think that's true with a baseball pitcher too. He gets tired and he can't concentrate, and they have to take him out and put another fellow in. My system of shooting instinctive, my snap shooting system, is aiming at the time I am drawing the bow, and I don't stick my hand out and pull the bow back like this. The bow is pushed and the hand comes back. And when my hand gets back here to the anchor, which is this finger in the corner of my mouth, the thing is gone. I cannot hold. If I try to hold, I lose everything. I've lost it. The thing has got to go when I get back there because that's when everything is right. The bow hand's taking care of the elevation and everything's working good. I'm not concerned about distances in yards. I'm concerned only in distances of feel. And I found that in distances of feel, and distances even that you step off or where the yardage is marked. If there's low ground or high ground between you and the target, the distance is farther than you thought it was. And you have to allow for that. But if I shoot an arrow, and let's say it drops low, I cannot make an adjustment. I have to shoot that arrow exactly the same way as I did the other one. And to get a little better elevation, I pull the arrow back a little further. That's the only way I can make a correction. And it's a screwy kind of thing, but that's the way I have to work this thing out. But it works out so good for me. I've had such good luck with it. I would hate to try to change to another system, but maybe if I were younger, I would.
What's the best shot you ever made?
Oh, golly. I shot a running deer running past Knickerbocker out in Nebraska. The picture of it is 3 of us in a gun. Yeah. We're making a drive. Driving up a draw or a canyon, and there were 3 of us on the stand. I was over on the left side. A friend of mine, Knickerbocker, was in the middle, and he made the mistake of getting in a bunch of brush, and somebody over the other edge, and this buck came through, very nice buck, 8-point whitetail, and he was really carrying the mail, and Nick couldn't. He got himself into these bushes, and he had no way to shoot, and the deer was coming right towards where he was, and he saw Nick, and he had to veer out around, and I saw that Nick was never going to get an arrow off, and I just instinctively threw one over there. It was about 60 yards, and the deer was on the dead run, and I made a good shot on him. That was luck. How I did it, I don't know. I couldn't reconstruct the whole thing. I just know that I pulled up and shot. And my practice in the past had taken care of everything. The body, human body, it's a great thing. I shot in a tiger hunt in India. We had baited a tiger, and the tiger was known to be up in a draw. And I was up. We were making a film. I had a photographer, and the photographer and the Maharaja were in a blind up on a tree. This is a place where they baited tigers, had been for hundreds of years. And they had he was up in the blinds, and they took some boards and made a place up in the tree. He was up there with the gun and with the photographer. He was protecting the photographer. And I was in the top of a palm tree that had been cut off about 30 feet up. And they put me up there in the ladder, and then they took the ladder away so the tiger couldn't climb up there to keep me company. And then they had about 50 natives making the drive, and they were pounding on cans and shooting muzzle-loading guns and beating the trees with sticks and yelling. And it was a very steep wall canyon. On the other side, there was a stone wall that nothing could climb, and it was about 100 yards over there. I was looking over at some brush that was in the bottom, but here was this stone wall that went up a couple 100 feet. And I looked over there and saw this tiger. And he was pacing back and forth. And the Maharaja told me they had some hunters there on elephants and some other hunters up trees. The tiger had to be killed. This was serious business because these natives were out there driving and, they want to get something out of it. And the tigers wouldn't be eating up their children or their cattle or sheep and goats. So the tiger had to be killed. It was, from that point of view, not a sporting thing. And I expected that to hear somebody's gun go off real soon, and the tiger would be dead and the hunt would be over because it was too far from me. And that didn't happen. And after, I guess it felt like 5 minutes, but probably 50 seconds, I said to myself, well, maybe if I shoot an arrow beyond him, maybe he'll come my way. Rattling around the rocks there. And I shot an arrow that I expected to go over him, but it went right through his lungs, and they had me a tiger. So normally you don't take long shots like that. And as you go hunting, it's the fair chase enters into it, and you shouldn't take long shots with a bow or a gun for fear of not hitting the animal in the right place and crippling it. But we all do. We get excited, and those kind of things happen. But you ask me, or I was asked, and I'm frequently asked, what's the longest shot I ever did? And I shot a deer a little farther than that, but that was, I normally don't shoot that far. I like to get real close, but sometimes you can get too close, so then you got a problem also. And I've done it both ways.
This episode would not be possible without the help from our friends at Bear Archery, Inside Archery, and Ted Nugent. Special thanks to all those guys who helped out to help make this episode possible. Remember, get outside, take a kid outdoors, do what Fred Bear wanted. Teach archery, teach the heritage, join the hunt.
Thanks so much for listening to the Bowhunter Planet podcast, online at bowhunterplanet.com with your host, Team BHP. Check us out on Facebook at Bowhunter Planet. We'll catch you next time.